If you don't know what you stand for, you show up quite inconsistently. Everyone wavers in their values. That's fine, but if you haven't got a way to find your equilibrium, that throws you. People you are leading need to feel that sense of safety, predictability. What are you about? And so it is a journey of, as you're learning what your leadership style is, really honouring your values and then amplifying that with your skills.
Hey everybody, this week I'm joined by Sehaam Cyrene. He's a leadership coach or coach-leadership advocate, as I've just been corrected, but I'm sure I'm going to get you to explain all about that. But super excited to have you, Sehaam, because this podcast is all about leadership, and it always has been. It's something that I've been incredibly interested in my whole career, almost academically so, of how to become a good leader and how to... I've always felt like I've been a leader. I've always wanted that. I've always craved that in terms of I've wanted to take charge of direction, and you need to bring people with you along the way if you're going to achieve anything. And so it's always been a fascination of mine of how to be the best leader I can. And so delighted to have you on to talk about some of those things, because you know far more about it than I do. I'm looking forward to learning from you, and I'm looking forward to the listeners learning that too. So welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good. Thank you for having me on, James. Yeah, look, and I can tell from just the conversations that you and I have had that, and it's quite typical of someone who is quite creative and loves problem solving, that there's an excitement that comes with that, right? And I think that's what drives the leadership, is that sense of there's something exciting here, and I want other people to be excited about it as well. So, yeah, but it's tricky.
It is
to
tricky.
Take people along with you. Yeah,
it is tricky, but the benefits are tangible, because a good leader in entrepreneurship will build a good business, and probably a big business, because they've had the ability to bring people along the journey and solve complex problems. Because it's really interesting. I actually had a conversation the other day with one of my friends. We play on our PlayStations together online, and we talk about random stuff, and he's a corporate lawyer, so completely different sphere. But we were chatting about someone that we both know that really wants to make impact, really wants to be a founder, really wants to be a CEO, clearly, but has their way of doing things, and has their way that they want things, and will tell people that they want things that way because that is the way it's most likely to succeed. And there's this interesting concept where actually, if you want to go far, you can't have exactly what the best thing is to go far. You have to take a hit on the quality of the thing, the project, the work, because everyone is energized to do it in that specific way, and then you will go quicker and you will go further. And so even part of leadership in that situation is actually demonstrating the humility, or just the taking the ego hit of, this isn't going to be made in my image completely. I'm still going to have to put my name to it. I'm still going to have to be responsible for it, but it's not going to be in my image, because that's actually the best possible scenario, because it will go far. And that is a constant battle that I find as well in trying to grow things, of how to motivate people versus getting it done in my way. I don't know, maybe that's the first concept we can talk about. It's fascinating how even that displays itself in leadership, I guess.
Well, it is, and you know, it is. We talk about taking people with you. So how do you do that, right? And you can be excited about an idea or an opportunity or tech or whatever, but if you don't share in the spoils, you will lose people along the way. If you don't allow people to an opportunity to get emotionally attached to the idea, to the opportunity, they're not really going to take that much. They're not going to be that much invested in it, and that's what really great leadership is. It's allowing space for other people to contribute, to shape what that something looks like. And yes, letting go of your ego and a bit of humility to basically say, it's so long as it's moving in that direction, I can let some of the details be designed by other people, right? Yeah, it's always a balance, isn't it? When you're excited about something, you've got a vision for how you see it panning out. And you've probably spent enormous amount of time thinking about it in great detail and solving bits of problems here and there. And so it's a skill to be able to let go of some of that and go, okay, well, this is, I've seen it in this way, but maybe there's a better way. And there usually is. There usually is if you bring other people in. But then the challenge sits in sort of expressing yourself clearly and knowing for yourself, okay, I'm willing to relinquish control and design, this much of it, but I've got really specific things that I feel are super important, and so working that out is valuable when you're doing that, because otherwise you're just clinging on to everything, and that's not fun for other people.
And it's exhausting for yourself in the long term as well. It's going to contribute to burnout.
Absolutely.
And everyone's a moron except me, because that element of psychopathy that tends to come out and is overly expressed in CEOs and particularly Fortune 500s. You mentioned expressing yourself clearly. I think this is a fascinating one, because people that find themselves as CEOs and founders and leaders, they have an ability, because of their position and they're in charge, to craft a life where they live authentically, and they often crave this. This is an expression of them because it's what they've chosen to do, and they're dying to just live authentically through this. Part of living authentically then is becoming the leader who you actually are. And I think for people that are early stage founders, there'll be plenty of health tech founders listening to this that are in year 1, year 2, year 3, etc., that are finding their way with leadership. They'll be managers and people that work in those companies. There'll be clinicians even, actually, that are leaders, that have become registrars, that are becoming consultants, that are having to lead, that may not know what type of leader they actually are within themselves, or how to express that properly, because there is more than one way to lead. There's many different ways to lead. And one thing that I see is that we have these role models in particularly what they're calling the broligarchy, that, in the US at the minute, you've got the Trumps, the Elon Musks, demonstrating a very sort of autocratic style of leadership that's about strength and like a certain definition of masculinity, which I think we're sort of coming back round to that now, for whatever reason, which was always expressed in business for a long time. You heard about the likes of like Steve Jobs, like treating people horrendously, shouting like make it quicker in his garage, like needs to load up quicker, and that was very much a blueprint of how to do business. And there's been a large and very appropriate feminist movement which has brought more women into the workplace and into business and into founder roles, and we'll keep pushing for that, and investment and things like that, which is starting to, and in fact even at a sort of government level, and seeing, was it the Finnish prime minister that was female and elected, and what effect that's now having on various infrastructure and different organizations and things. So leadership is one of those things that can be done in so many different ways. How does one discover what type of leader they are, and how do they lead authentically?
Great question. There are so many, and yet there aren't enough good ones very often for us, especially starting out in a venture or career or whatever you're stepping into, or if you've been in an organisation for a while. There's the place that I start with leaders is understanding your personal values, because if you don't know what you stand for, you show up quite inconsistently because you've got no way of measuring for yourself, is this the right thing to do? Because you've got to live with whatever decisions you make. And even if you are sort of, quite forgiving of yourself of making bad decisions, they don't go away. They do still sit with you. They sort of sit in the background, and we may push them out of, the front of our mind, but they're there and they accumulate. So the reason I start leaders thinking about and determining what their values are is because they can start to see some patterns for themselves about how they've lived their lives, where they've made decisions from quite a young age often. And those things ground you. And it's a really simple exercise of looking at a list of, descriptions of values and then going, these are my 10, and then whittling it down to 3 because 10's too many to kind of carry around with you. But you need a quick shorthand of, why am I feeling conflicted? Why is this feeling difficult? Why do I feel uncomfortable or betrayed or whatever? And it's likely that our values have been compromised. We compromise our values as well because we go after shiny things and we're opportunists or whatever. So that happens too. So it's that consistency, and you can't be consistent if you're not grounded and you don't know what you stand for, and you don't. Everyone wavers in their values. Sometimes we honour them brilliantly, and sometimes we're just rubbish at it. Right? We really, for lots of different reasons, we're exhausted, burnt out, whatever, under pressure. That's fine, but if you haven't got a way to find your equilibrium, that throws you. And then what people experience of you is just inconsistent, not really knowing how, are you going to flip-flop? Are you, sometimes you are really passionate about this and sometimes you're just, there's nothing. And so people you are leading need to feel that sense of safety, predictability. What are you about? And so it is a journey of, as you're learning what your leadership style is really honouring your values, and then amplifying that with your skills. So you've got to learn how to be good at conversations, and study whatever, movies, scripts, comedy, loads of things, loads of ways that we can access to become students of conversation, and learning to listen and ask sometimes just the simplest question, like, the best phrase that you could use if it's if you're disagreeing or someone's excited, or you can use it sort of almost everywhere. It's tell me more. It's not even a question. It's just a phrase. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. I disagree with you. Tell me more about that. So it's if there's one phrase that people could pick up and use more, it's that. And it's holding space for learning, to listen, right? To be in that space with other people, learn from them. So often, I get leaders to do various exercises, which is, the personal values, understanding what the personal values are of members of their team. And it always blows my mind because they come back and they go, oh wow, I didn't know those things about them. I've been working with this person for 5+ years and I didn't really know what made them tick, and now it all kind of makes sense and I understand that. And so just that ability to listen. Life goes so fast, particularly in the entrepreneurial world, particularly when you're, in leadership roles. You've got to make a lot of decisions quickly. And that's the challenge for leaders, is to find and eke out time to just slow down, listen, decide that, okay, in this meeting, I'm just going to listen and observe and see what's going on around me. And there's another time for when I can lead.
Yeah. There's two things I want to pick up on there. The first one is that knowing yourself thing. So the most, I would say, in my professional life, the most important exercise that I was ever asked to do was when I became the director of the Digital Health London Accelerator. I was job sharing with someone called Hannah, and it was insisted that we had a coach because we were job sharing, because it was new, because it was the first time that either of us had been promoted to that kind of level, and we were young to be doing that. And it was a fantastic move because, and this is for anyone that's like entering their first management positions or having to lead people or lead an organization for the first time, I can massively recommend getting some coaching for a few weeks, because someone to just bounce off and reflect off is incredible, that knows what they're doing. Because the first thing that we were asked to do was a paid for deep Myers-Briggs. Deep. This thing was hundreds of questions. So not only did it, and for people that don't know what a Myers-Briggs is, it's a personality test, and you can go to, I think it's 16personalities.com to like do like a really kind of light version of it. But it's amazing once you do this, because it holds your personality up and it tells you what your values are and what you're like in the workplace and what you're like in romantic relationships, your strengths and your weaknesses, and it massively holds a mirror up. The 16 personalities one is good. This thing was incredible because it took each of those 4 letters that it grades you in or whatever, but it then split those into multiple different types. So, for example, I came up as very introverted, except I was out of preference for expression, which means that I will not like being put on the spot. But if I've got time to prepare something, I'm going to express myself willingly. So and I'm really going to express myself. But it also means like I'm a really deep thinker and I'll generally stay quiet until I'm triggered. And then like all of a sudden it just goes absolutely wild, and everything else is just like, I just see white. And I'm just like, right, that's it. I'm going to really express myself. But it's fascinating how learning something like that then prepares you for, I can now observe myself in these situations. So I know that once I'm triggered to express myself, I'm going to completely explode. So I now know this. So what I need to work on in positions and places and situations of leadership is knowing this. So perhaps I could be more expressive up to the point of previously when I'd expressed myself. Perhaps I can do that more. Perhaps I need to show people more. And that kind of brings me to my other point, which is that I wanted to raise. So not only was it incredibly useful, like getting to know myself to be a good leader, the other thing is in expressing myself, therefore, consistently, which is what you've just talked about, it leads to predictability of what I'm like as a leader, which then gives people a framework. So people know I'm incredibly kind until someone screws me over, and then I will go hell for leather using every available possible resource to bring justice upon what has just happened to me or us or anybody that has crossed us. Everyone now knows that. And so everyone now knows not to do that, or they know to bring that to the table only when they know they want justice for the thing that's happened to them, if they're in my team, because there's just no stopping me at that point. That people need to know that they've wronged us, and they need to know that with the full force of the law, frankly. And we have lawyers on retainer for this reason. And so it's things like that now that's formed a framework. That's formed a framework of predictability. They know that I'll laugh and joke and send emojis on Slack and I'll and da 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 da. So that's completely fine and reasonable, and therefore da da da. So I've noticed this in my life practically, that offering that predictability through consistency reaps rewards, because it gives people the space to play where they can play, but it gives people the framework to be strict where they need to be strict, and loads of different parameters of that. But it's the consistency piece that I think is interesting, because like there have been moments where you're super stressed and your resources are low and all that sort of stuff, where I don't know, it slips and you say something or do something that's kind of out of preference, and there's almost this like confusion amongst the team, and there's a confusion amongst even Jessica, like my wife and co-founder, of like, like, where's that come from? Like, what's the, and then there's just loads of energy spent on like, what the heck just happened and reacting to it and all that sort of stuff. And so what's your advice on maintaining that consistency? Is it writing those values down? Like, because actually what you've just said is one of the first times that I'm like, oh, actually that makes sense to actually write company values down, because actually that does form a framework. And maybe that is something you want to pull everyone else in. So is it having these things documented? Is it trying to very actively with your senior leadership team push these things onto them? Is there a good way to express values and create consistently through an organization? And how do you coach leaders to do so?
So this is interesting, and the sort of standard is that organisations have core values. Okay, great, and typically those core values often, especially for a startup scale up, come from the founders and the people leading the organisation. As an organisation grows, there's a bit of a review, and the senior leadership team kind of comes together and does a clean sweep of them. Ideally, you want to involve more people across the organisation so you get a balanced view. The risk always with company or organisation core values is that they become quite bland, because we're trying to merge so many things that one organisation's core values start to sound a lot like another one's, right? So there's not much of a differentiation. So that's not to say that having organisation core values is not useful. It is. However, the secret really sits, or the magic sits, in the individual's personal values, because that's what's going to drive them. That's how they make decisions. That's how they decide whether they like working with you or not. You know, you do things to a really good standard, or the quality of work is always great, and I like that about you, and I'm motivated by that because you appreciate that about me. So my preference is to lean towards getting leaders and members of your team to understand their own personal values. And then how does it connect with the organization's values? So for me, if quality is something that's super important, and the organization says, you know, customer first, then what does that look like? What is that? How does that manifest itself in terms of the work that I do for the organisation? Do I have an outlet to express and deliver high quality in regard to customers? And if I do, and I'm acknowledged for that, then that's my sweet spot. I'm going to be a great space. But if I'm not allowed to do that, if I'm told, no, you can't, for whatever reason, no budget, it's not a priority, we've got other things going on, customers are just going to have to suck that bit up, then that's going to frustrate me as a member of the team, right? So personal values is where, you know, we're selfish beings, really. We want to do things because they please us or we gain something from it. So if we're not acknowledging that part of ourselves, and this is so prevalent and obvious to me in the sort of younger generation of leaders coming through, just a different way of looking at things. If those things, if I'm not allowed to express those things, I can't bring them into my work, I'm not really going to be that engaged or invested in hanging around and doing something where I'm not really appreciated. So yes, values are important, but I think the biggest wins and magical stuff happens when you encourage your people to figure out what their values are and then how they want to contribute, how they can contribute. That's not to say that it's, you know, let's make a perfect world for you and, you know, only you.
Because that's the danger, isn't it?
Right, and risk the organisation's sort of goals and mission. But it's a balance, and it carves out that space for them to do that. There's a pragmatic side, and that is also part of your role as a leader, is to be able to translate what the strategy is and how you can contribute to that and what the priorities are and what the risks are, and then taking, helping that person figure out, okay, in the context of my work, I'm able to express and honour my values in these ways, but I also know there's a functional requirement, right, to deliver on the strategy, to do my part for the team and so on. Yeah.
You mentioned the younger generation, and this is something that I definitely want to talk to you about, because I'm having a lot of conversations at the moment on this, and I'm a sort of late millennial. I was born in 86, so I'm 38 now, I think. Don't feel 38, but yeah, I'm 38, which actually sounds quite old. I'm pushing 40, wow. I
You're
still feel
okay,
21,
you're in
of
good
course,
company. I'm
etc.
way older than that.
But it's funny, you look at startup founders now, 23, 24, 25, 26 years old,
Right.
like 30 is still young to be a startup founder. And there's the workplace has changed. Motivating people seems to have changed. I find there's a lot of frustration felt by particularly millennial bosses, that millennial bosses like me are very much like, oh, it's okay, do what you want, like, it's okay. We're trying to fight that stuff back the whole time. But this younger generation, they're forming companies together, they're hiring people even younger than them. And so they are finding a way to hire people and motivating people. And yet that seems to be a little bit of a struggle for millennials, boomers, that seem to complain about this younger generation. So what have you noticed about leadership of the younger generation? And thinking about people listening to this podcast, it might be clinicians might be registrars that have got F1s. It might be managers that have got juniors. It might be founders looking for co-founders or early hires. It might be there's lots of different ways that we can spin this. But in terms of that younger generation, what have you observed about how to lead them, and indeed for them, how can they be leaders to each other?
I love this. So we have had decades now of discussions, resources, books, videos on leadership, right? Servant leadership has been sort of the thing that we've kind of got to.
What's servant leadership, sorry?
Servant leadership is there to kind of support the individual, take away the blockers, enable them, and so on, in service of, basically, in service of your people.
Right.
Versus command and control, do this because I told you to, or do, right? So servant leadership is a more humble way.
The you work for them thing that Gary Vaynerchuk, for example,
that you're there to support their success and help them achieve. Right, exactly. I'm at the next, what I call the next era of leadership, which is where leaders use coaching skills in a pragmatic sort of commercially minded way, and what I call coach leadership, or coach-leadership. So it's the actual application that you use in your conversations, whatever they are, whoever it's with, right? So we've had decades of being educated away from command and control and towards this servant, more compassionate leadership style. And everywhere on social media, there are experts that are telling you how to do it better. The younger generation have been consumers of all of that. They know it. They've kind of grown up on it in a way that my generation didn't. And the other thing is that's happened. So I've got 3 young adults, as children. So I know I've been educated by them as well, and they are great. They're great consumers of that and analyze it and synthesize it really quickly, so they know instantly what they need to do. They are also have been taught to self-advocate, and they're much better at it than my generation. Yes. And I've spoken to people, my peers, about this a lot. And we joined the workforce and we didn't question anything. We did as we were told. We followed the rules. We went through the steps to get promotion. We got whatever certifications we needed to prove our ability and so on. And that's not how the younger generation do things. They're also a bit put off by what they see as this sort of stressful leadership, burnout and so on. They're much better at understanding their mental health and taking care of themselves, or at least aiming to. And that whole combination, that perfect storm, makes for older leaders, when they're dealing with the younger generation, they have this response of, you're so demanding. Why are you so opinionated about stuff? Right? And who are you to tell me? I've got tons of experience. I've got decades of experience, right, in my role. So don't tell me, And so they get frustrated with them. And
I'm laughing
and
just because of how seen I feel at this point, by the way.
So, but actually we're missing a trick, because for me it's really exciting, because it aligns really well with coaching, because when you use coaching skills as a leader, you really are trying to empower. You want that response from people. You want them to come passionate and excited and have got opinions and so on. The challenge for me as a leader is I've got to have the skills to get that excitement out of you, but then also manage it in a way that works for the business and for the organization. And I don't have those skills. No one taught me that. I haven't had to deal with somebody who's opinionated as you, right?
Yes.
So, and I say that with a lot of love, about being opinionated. I love it. And, for me, it's like, fantastic. Okay, you understand yourself. And that is part of the journey, is understanding who you are.
Yeah.
Us oldies have a lot of difficulty giving ourselves permission to advocate for ourselves, especially women, to be able to say, I'm really good at this, and here's why, and I can contribute in this way. We have to go and look at getting ourselves a degree or a certification or whatever to prove, that piece of paper, to prove that we can do it. Men are a little bit different, older generation. They do step into spaces a lot more. It's a different thing. It's like, well, that's exciting. I think I can do that. It's a nice challenge. I'll go for it. Younger generation, I think there's a real mix. And you spoke about sort of this bro culture. I find that challenging, that sort of bro culture, because I think it's not very inclusive in the broadest sense. It just doesn't it doesn't gel with me. I think there's a lot to take from it that's great, but there's also it doesn't mean that you're a great leader because you are self-advocating in that way. But younger generation, I love it. And I think that is going to shift things massively, which is why I'm, banging the drum of, you've got to train your leaders to have coaching skills. And that's not about becoming a coach. That's about using the techniques and the conversation skills, like listening and holding spaces and, not solving problems, not doing the heavy lifting, about actually growing the person in front of you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the younger generation wants. Like, show me, guide me, give me the opportunity, support me. But, I know I can be better. And that's the other thing. It's like they are striving for that for themselves.
It's really interesting. I've got a good story on this, by the way, because...
Great.
So we went through a phase of hiring some interns. We had interns with us for a few weeks. And one of the things that we do, we record podcasts like this. We clip them and we put the clips out, and the clips drive engagement and all sorts of stuff. Right. And we pick those clips based on, the best bits of the podcast. Mm-hmm. Someone in the team asked one of the interns to listen to the podcast and clip it. And, in a couple of days, like just send me the time codes of the clips and we'll get those out. So you've got a couple of days to do it. And a couple of days passed and the intern got asked for the clips. And the intern said, I had a listen and no, there just wasn't any good bits in it. And the team member who's managing them, also very young, but certainly not wired in the same way, was just a bit like, but you have, that's sort of your job. Like, you have to find them. They're like, no, like I've tried. Like, there's nothing here that would be good enough to put out. So, I've just not done it. And the team member came to Jess and I and was like, how do I handle this? Like, I just don't know. I'm completely disarmed by this. Like, I've got no ability to, like, but that's your job. Like, and they're just so comfortable saying no. Obviously, there's an element of where does self-advocacy become disrespect for authority, and like where does defending your position and being creative become you just haven't done your job. There's that. However, I'm not going to touch on that. What I am going to touch on is that I had this perverse like grin on my face of just like, this is hilarious. Like, this is amazing, because I'm fully in a situation now where I'm learning something new. I was like, this is, and I get this like weird sense of like, I'm so uncomfortable that clearly I'm about to learn something. So I listened back to the podcast, and it was one of my podcasts, and I listened to it. They were right. The intern was bang on. There was no bits, because it was one of those podcasts where it was long, it was winding, there was so much context behind it, which is the content that I like to create, by the way, which is more the sort of Joe Rogan 3 hours, not his pseudoscience, but the Joe Rogan 3 hour version rather than the, 20-minute VC where you're just going to get these amazing like snippets. So the intern was absolutely right. They didn't package it in the right way, and they didn't like, but what I thought was fascinating was that had that been a command and control, we would have got some very average rubbish clips, but worse than average, below average rubbish clips out. We'd have put those out. That has the risk of weakening the brand. You're probably worse off putting that out than putting nothing out. So actually, by having that intern being able to advocate for themselves, and baked into that was an assumption of the quality that we would want, an assumption of the quality that they would want to attach themselves to for the quality of their work. It was really interesting. Now, that intern has a lot to learn in terms of how to give that information and not to wait until the deadline, and to actually find something or to suggest how things might be different, or what we could do instead. Like, there's lots that, again, a teachable moment in that regard as well. But there was so much to that we gained from the fact that they are not in a command and control environment, and had learnt to self-advocate in a way that a millennial I don't think would have done. The millennial me would have just found something and then I'd have been panicking that like, oh, these clips actually suck. Like, I couldn't find the best bits, and now there's a lot of negative energy associated with that. And just interestingly, there was a lot of truth to find in that scenario, and a teachable moment for a lot of different people, I think. I don't know what your take is on that.
And that plays out in every organisation daily, right? And so there's a couple of things. Look, you've got a young person coming in and doesn't have the context, and that can be freeing. It can also be a risk, right? But the responsibility is on their line manager to understand that you have someone who's not experienced in the workforce, that you can't make the assumptions that you might make of someone who's been in the workforce 2 or 3 years. And also an assessment of how critical is this piece of work to get right or not. And actually, it plays out when you're delegating something to someone, a piece of work, right? There is, we make massive assumptions about someone's ability or readiness or interest to take on this piece of work. We also rush it, so we typically try and hand over in one meeting, one conversation, and because I don't want to deal with it anymore, I'm too busy, good, done, pass that on. And then it comes back to bite us because the quality, or nothing eventuated, no work got done, as in your example. And it's a challenge for every leader I've ever partnered with, is this. People will protest and say, and I Sehaam, I think I delegate really well. Okay, but you're having to fight fires all the time. So let's unpack that a little bit and see what's going on there.
If you complain about something at work, then clearly...
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you're having to get stuck back in and fix stuff, right? Okay. And what I encourage people to think about is gates, as in the gate in delegate. You have a conversation with somebody. You figure out what they're capable of doing. You try to determine their understanding of the task at hand. You talk about the consequences of it going well or not, and you understand what their next steps are going to be. Sounds pretty straightforward. So you do that, and the idea is you're trying to create some ownership by getting them to talk about how they're going to take it on, but you're also trying to assess where the risks are if they do or don't know what to do, or that they haven't got the experience to take it on. There's too much of a stretch in trying to match what they're capable of doing with this new task. And so you go in small bites. You do low risk things. Okay, take on this bit. Let's see how you respond to that. All right, that went really well. Fantastic. And I'm going to give you another, make it a little bit more complex or add another layer to it. But if you find that, they haven't done that first bit, then you've got to come back and recontract, and it's on you. It's like, okay, well, I must have missed something, right? I must have made an assumption here that was wrong. So what is it that you found difficult in this? What prevented you from doing it? And that's what I mean by having these coaching skills, because, as a coach, you are trying to help your client, your coachee, figure out what is it that they want to achieve, and how are they going to get there, and what's going to stop them from getting there. And so invaluable as a leader to be able to do that, or as a people manager.
I think everyone clinical in the NHS needs to hear this, because what came to mind for me there is clinical areas in the NHS are very patchy in terms of the quality of leadership, and it comes down to the individual's desire to coach, to teach, to lead well and properly. There isn't, frankly, I believe, a decent framework, certainly not when I was clinical, and certainly not based on what everyone is still saying that's coming through and trying to leave. There isn't a good framework for leadership. And I just think that culturally there is this problem of, well, this is how I got taught, so this is how I'm going to teach you. It's like, it's this generational passing on of a very traumatic style of leadership that, well, I had to learn this way, and you've got it so easy now that actually I'm going to come down hard on you as well and just get it done. Like, that's your job. I shouldn't have to sit here and do blah, 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 because that teaching time isn't placed into the job plan. It sort of is at consultant level with PAs for teaching and stuff, but again, I'm generalizing here, but a few people will look at that as time off, not time teaching, let's just say, or preparing. Right. So I think there is this big problem in clinical medicine, that it comes down to the individual and as I say, just their desire. And there's a really interesting person to follow for people listening, and you might enjoy this as well. There's someone called Dr. Disney. He's a pediatrician in the US. Sat on a panel with him at Health Amsterdam last year. A wonderful man who has taken it upon himself to absorb all of that generational abuse, frankly, that he's had, the denigration, the humiliation, the embarrassment. He's taken it upon himself to not pass that on, and he is proud of it. And he posts these videos on TikTok and everywhere about how he's teaching his trainees. He's attending in the US, but how he teaches trainees. But he posts like him unboxing the gifts that they've got him after every rotation of students that come round, and the cards that they've written and the things that they've said to him, because he's just taken it upon himself to sort this out, and he's wanting to be this beacon of light amongst the darkness. And it's funny because, going a bit meta here, talking about leadership, like that's leadership on another level. Like that's like a self-sacrificial, like epic amount of leadership that he's pushing that out to as many people as possible. Like he's trying to lead to as many people as possible. He's trying to influence his peers. He's trying to influence and lead his juniors in a better way. Like he's trying to change the system and lead upwards, if that's a thing. Like it's incredible what he is trying to do. Like like that type of person is a whole nother type of leader that I don't even know if that has a name, but or a concept behind it. But that is fascinating to me. But the NHS needs to change through people like this, unfortunately, rather than through anything structural, because I don't know if that's possible.
I agree, and I think there's. I say to leaders, you've got two responsibilities. One is to be strategic, and the second is to grow the capability of your people.
Yep.
That's it. And everything that you are aiming to achieve, you should use those two filters to determine best use of your time. And if you are getting dragged into solving problems, troubleshooting, fixing stuff, then you're not growing the capability of your people, because you shouldn't be doing that, right? So that comes down to your ability to delegate and nurture and coach and mentor and so on, right? And it's about risk as well. That is all about the risk to your team or the organization or your customers. Is what is the capability of your people? Can they do their job? And I entice them by saying, don't you want to go away on holiday and not have to worry about what's going on at work, or open your laptop or solve something, right? So if that's the case, and I'm sure your family would really love you to not open up your laptop and be fully present with them. If that's your motivator, then you really need to invest in growing the capability of your people. And that means you've got to grow yourself in that process. And then strategically, you're the person, whether that's, externally facing or internally facing, or removing blockers, or being in conversations with your peers, or managing up, whatever it is, you've got to be strategic, and that is about relationships and your ability to sit with people who you disagree with and have a different perspective on, but open them up to possibilities. Share your vision, go out and talk about it, right? And so, yeah. Two things: be strategic and grow the capability of your people, and then look at your calendar and remove yourself from anything that doesn't help you achieve those things, right? And question: do I really need to be in this meeting? Do I really need to be there? Because if you don't start looking at your role in that way, and this goes for when you're talking about how do you lead, how do you find your leadership style? If you don't do these things, you are going to be drawn into things that you're not adding value to. You've paid people, you've brought people on board to do it, to take that function and responsibility on. Follow through on that, make that happen, grow that person to be able to do it. Because if you don't, you are going to not enjoy your leadership role. You're going to be firefighting. You're going to be frustrated and annoyed with the people around you, that they're not as engaged, they're not as invested in this. They don't seem to get how important it is. And you're going to be the one, working through the night, rewriting a document or fixing something. That's not fun.
No.
That's not what I signed up for.
No.
And you're not fun to be around either as a leader in that way. You're not someone, they're going to gravitate towards. So leaders that help us figure out, how to apply ourselves in the context that we're working in the sort of limits of what we're working in, or the pressures or the deliverables, whatever it is, those are the people we're attracted to, and we'll bend over backwards for those people.
It's a funny kind of line though, isn't it? Between, and I'm thinking of even the med reg on call in a hospital. You could think of that. You could think of a startup founder hiring their first 10 people. You could think of a Series C or D founder CEO with their senior leadership team. Your presence in a lot of things is support. Your actions supporting are also support. Letting them do things completely on their own can be empowering, but it also can be seen as, well, they're just making me get on with it while they swan around. Like, I mean, not necessarily that, but also they've left me in it, and I've now got to figure this out myself. That might be perceived as a negative. So there's a line and a balance, isn't there, really, of and again, I'm going to be super practical here, because I did an exercise relatively recently of trying very cognizantly to extract myself from certain things. And it's not as straightforward as just going into your calendar and rejecting the meeting. There's a process to it. Because again, being a good leader to do that is going to require, hey, I'm wanting to do this. What do you need in order to enable this? But even that, is that too much support? Should you just like extract yourself and sink or swim? Like, again, is that a leadership style thing? Like, I don't know, because companies grow and roles change. My role as CEO changed. I had to do that, or else we couldn't go to the next stage, and I was involved in everything. I can't be involved in everything. And so I don't know, it's an area that I've struggled through, to be perfectly honest, and startups will feel this too.
Absolutely. It's not a one size fits all. You can't have an approach and go, right, I'm just going to extract myself from all of this, because who are you handing it to? Right. And so that's why growing the capability of your people and doing that delegating piece and being thoughtful and intentional about how you hand something off or give someone a responsibility. Everything is about risk. Am I creating more risk or am I removing risk? If I'm a bottleneck, that's a risk. If I haven't handed over to somebody well enough that they've that they've kind of got it first time round, 80% done, whatever, is that an acceptable risk? Am I okay with that? Knowing what what's okay and what's not okay is really important. So no, I'm not suggesting that you kind of look at your calendar and you go, oh, I'm just not going to show up to those meetings.
This and all following events, please. Yes,
I've got loads of time now. No, but it's being thoughtful about how you hand over stuff to people, and really thinking about the function, removing yourself. Like, what's the value that I add? And then when you do that, think about, there might be a really simple task or activity that you can hand over, and within a week it's taken care of, and you can look at the metrics or whatever, or it's great. The quality's fantastic. It was done on time. It was brilliant, blah, blah. There may be more complex activities or responsibilities that actually mean it takes 6 months to do a full handover. Yeah. So, you can't, it's not about going, this is my job. There's a process that we need to go through to do that diligently, and give them a chance to really grow into it, and for us to truly let go of it. So yes, if you want to go on holiday in June, you should be starting that process now, right? To prepare, so that and that it's a good exercise to do. If you've got a holiday booked for the summer, I would encourage people to look at what's ahead. What are the biggest pain points that you have, or that eat your time, that you wish you weren't doing? And then start looking around to find the person that you can build to take on that capability, so that you can go on holiday.
Famously, a Tim Ferriss idea, mini retirements, because of exactly this. Yes, you get the 3 months off, but it's actually, the value is in the process you go through for the previous 6.
Right.
Of making sure that all of those things are handed over, and you then start to grow your team and their capabilities, so that when you come back, you can focus on the new things and the opportunities and the firefighting if needed. That gives you that time, because you've got yourself out of the day-to-day. One of those really important benefits of those mini retirements, Jessica and I got married last May, and so exactly the same thing happened. So we've just had, we've got a 9-week-old boy now, so there's like elements of time that I don't have to spend on the business, certainly for this period, for a few months. And so it's the process that we went through in anticipating this that actually has been all of the value, because actually now the things that I can spend my time on are very different. And I'm going to mention this because it's been rattling around ever since you said it. Like, the role of a leader is growing the capability of your people, and the word capability there is really interesting, because it's not, your role isn't just paying them and expecting them to get better at their job because they're in the job a long time. Your role is actually to grow their capability, and that's a very active, not a very passive thing. I think this is something actually that I'm going to take away as a key learning point of this conversation, actually, because it's funny that looks very different to like having one-to-ones or like all this sort of stuff. There's a very different element to it. And actually, I wanted to get your opinion on this because I've seen this a few times recently. The Airbnb CEO has come out and he says quite a lot, like quite openly, that he doesn't believe in one-to-ones because you become their therapist, and what you need to say to them, you pretty much need to say to more people anyway. So he says that he and other good CEOs just don't believe in one-to-ones. Now, for startup founders that are early on, in fact, you might be seed, you might be Series A, you might be Series B even. Your team might be 3, 30, 300 or 3,000. What do you think about that statement?
I'm not too familiar with his style of leadership, but I think if you have other people taking care of that, and potentially if you've got a chief of staff in your organisation that's maybe taking on that work and is being that people facing, then yeah, sure, you don't have that responsibility. I think it's an opportunity missed to not have one-to-ones from we can tackle it from different angles. From a selfish angle of the CEO, I think you're missing a trick. If you don't know, not investing in building that connection, that emotional connection with people that you're relying on to do some really important work. And you know what? Those people want that time with you. So it kind of goes with the territory. You don't get away with being a leader, in my opinion, and go, well, I'm not going to give you that time, because your people need that time with you. It's a connection. It's a connection to you. It's a connection to the business. It gives them, it's grounding. It allows you to monitor and observe risks or changes and so on among your people, what they're grappling with. I think you remove yourself from really being connected and in touch with the mood music to do that. So, yeah, I can't see how it is it's a personal thing, I guess, but I can't see how it's a good, strong manoeuvre on the part of a CEO, and certainly for your audience of people, you need to stay in contact. But as the organisation grows, you become more and more disconnected naturally, just as a function of the growth of an organisation. So to actively remove that contact seems a little counterproductive. You need to limit the number of direct reports that you have, for sure, right? You can't. Your optimal is 6 or 7, right. And all the more reason that they know how to coach down as well, right? So I think it's missing a trick, and the fact that people do need that and want that connection. Otherwise, your trust and your attachment to the organisation is at risk, I'd say.
And influence, perhaps.
Right? Pardon?
And influence, perhaps.
Influence. I think, yeah, maybe there's a sense of, I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve with this business. I don't need to know any more about it. It kind of runs itself. I don't think most organisations are like that. I think there's always a challenge, whether there's a shift in the marketplace, the economy, technology's moved on, and whatever. There is something that you need to have your finger on the pulse of, if only to kind of understand and know, what are my people thinking, and what is it, if I'm wanting to take them with me on the journey, what do I need to understand about where they're at, so I know how to communicate and land messages in the best way possible, right? And be in that conversation with them.
Before we start to wrap up, I want to go super practical and just give you a couple of scenarios. Basically, we'll plot the life of a clinician that moves into a startup, eventually becomes a founder, and then grows a company, right? So first of all, a clinician looking to lead. I mean, we've spoken about a few scenarios of them within medicine, but a clinician moving into a non-clinical role and a management role, having to work in an office and lead people, what should they know? What are some of the common challenges or common opportunities for them when it comes to leadership?
That it's messy. It's really messy. There's a lot of grey. Sometimes there are no easy decisions or choices about things, and having a way that you can navigate through that messiness or that ambiguity is really important. Sometimes you just got to make a decision, and there's a deadline, and that's okay. And I think it's learning to live with that imperfection, especially when you involve more people. That becomes quite chaotic. So you have to find a level of comfort with that. And it stays chaotic for quite a while, as I'm sure.
Yeah, so just to give you, I can give you a
with.
story on this as well. One of the things that counted against me in my interview for the accelerator when I joined the NHS accelerator, one thing that counted against me, they said, was when they asked at the end, do you have any questions? I kept asking, yeah, but what actually will I be doing? Like what actually is my job? Like, I know that you've said that it's supporting startups, and I know that I'll be using my expertise to do that, but what will I actually be doing? And they gave some like answer that was like, as long as they said something along the lines of, well, as long as you've got an Oyster card and a willingness to succeed, I'm sure you'll be fine. In the days of Oyster cards, that's aged me. But again, I was like, yeah, but I don't know what I'll be actually doing. Like, can you tell me what I'll be doing? And I was like really freaked out, because I was like, I'm going to accept this job and I've got literally no clue of what to do. But like, I obviously in part I was excited by that, but yeah, no, totally agree. The clinical system is so much based on points, and you know, you tick your competencies off, and then you get signed off if you've ticked all of your boxes. And it does not prepare you in the slightest for a world outside of medicine where, you know, relationships matter, and, you know, whether someone likes you or not can be the determinant of a promotion. And you're like, well, that's not fair. And it's like, well, the world's not fair.
Right.
Like,
right.
Oh, they were born into whatever, and they already know all these people. Cool, yeah, they'll get funding and you won't. Like, that's the world, and it's very difficult to accept when you've been in this like incredibly rigid points-based system where it's not really a meritocracy. It's just, have you ticked the boxes, and that gets you to the next phase. It's a very bizarre juxtaposition of worlds, that like really bizarre, that I try and
I think,
people to
and I think when you've worked as a clinician in healthcare, you have a process. You follow, and that's right. There's a process and procedure, and because you're caring for people, right? So,
which you love and hate, by the way. It's both of those things in different
scenarios. But you do become conditioned,
you do.
right? So that's how there is a step-by-step process, and you learn it, and you deliver. You go through that every time. It's not like that in the commercial or startup world or whatever. It can be really messy, and I think that can throw people a lot. I remember sitting on a flight next to a Navy SEAL.
Sure.
And
I wish you'd recorded that conversation. That would have been amazing.
That would have been amazing.
Navy SEAL about leadership.
Yeah. Well, so he was telling me, he left the Navy and tried to get into the corporate world, and he ended up training as a lawyer and worked in corporate America as a legal member of the team. And he said he couldn't stand it. He found it really difficult to adjust. No one followed the rules. No one. There wasn't clarity. People were playing games. Nothing was straightforward, and he found that really. The word that comes to mind is discombobulating.
Jarring,
I'm sure you didn't use that,
so,
but that he really struggled with that. And he really tried to sort of fit in, but he was used to having a process, knowing that he could rely on his team members, that they had his back. There was no ambiguity. No one was playing games. It's life or death. And it's similar in the NHS. And he said, I ended up going back into security work, private security work around the world, working with my ex-teammates because I knew they had my back and it was clean and clear. I knew exactly, we knew our roles, we knew what we were supposed to do. And I think it's quite similar when you move from a clinician role into a world that just can feel like a big mess.
Yeah.
And no one's really doing things, and people start things and then it gets dropped because something more important comes along, and that has to be responded to. And that's I think that's probably the biggest jarring, is a great word you used, experience for people moving into that, making that transition. So yeah, level of comfort. And the best thing you can do there is try and go and have conversations about what's priority here and learn to negotiate and trade. Okay, you've asked me to do this, but now we've switched, the focus is over here. Are you okay with the fact that I need to put that on pause? So really learning to negotiate and trade your way through that, and talk about priorities and risks as much as you can to help you decide where you should be spending your time.
Amazing.
That can ground you.
So our clinician, he or she has moved successfully. And they've had an idea, and they've gone to a VC, and they've raised £1 million, and they've hired 10 people for their startup. And our clinician, she's not quite sure how to lead. What should she do next? She's not sure of her leadership style. What should she do next?
Sounds like a multiple choice question. Right? What is the correct answer? They could all be correct answers. Which one are you going to go for? So what was your question about? She's got 10 people.
Needs to lead an organisation of 10 people. It's her organisation. How should she go about? Should she learn about leadership? Should she read about it? Should she do a Myers-Briggs test and find out about herself? Should she?
Right.
What should she actually do to be the best leader to that small organisation?
Well, probably not enough time to focus on growing yourself as a leader at this juncture. I'm going for first base, right? I think making sure everyone's clear about what their role and responsibilities are is probably the most pragmatic and important thing to do. Clarity. And that's not taking, and this is something I see happens a lot, is I've hired my mates, and you're good at this, you're good at that, okay, we're going to split the responsibilities. But if you've hired independently and got just people based on their skills, it's still a good thing to do, is to look at the functions that need to happen in the organisation. What are your priorities? What do you need to nail first in the first 3 months, 6 months? Being really clear on that. Do these people cover all the capabilities we need for the different functions, whether that's marketing, tech, operations, and being explicit about, these are your top priorities, this is your role and responsibilities. And it doesn't have to be super fleshed out, like a very detailed corporate job description, but it needs to be anchored and aligned with what you're trying to achieve for the different milestones that you want to do. So do that assessment. Do I have the right people with the right skills to deliver on that function? And if I don't, then I've got to be prepared to have the conversation that says, either you're going to grow your capability and I can support you with that, or we need to transition you into another role or a different role, or get someone else in, and know what your risk appetite is in doing that. So yeah, you've got your 10 people,
isn't it, at that early stage, seemingly? So you're pushing for clarity initially, so everybody's clear, but now it's vigilance almost of how is this machine working, if I've understood that correctly.
Yeah, quite strong words there, but yeah, you're wanting to monitor and observe.
Yeah, those very controlling
is it
words,
working? You want to observe, is this working, right?
Observe, yeah. You talked about the Navy SEAL. It's put me in a mindset. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's not your fault. It's not your fault.
But it's observing coming back and recontracting and negotiating. Okay, what's working, what's not working?
Okay.
Should we be tackling this differently? What do you think? What have you thought about doing? And that's what I mean by not doing the heavy lifting, is the balance of, I've got ideas about how this needs to be tackled, but what do you think?
Interesting.
How are you going to go about doing it? What have you tried doing? Where have you come unstuck? What do we need to rethink? And then
it demonstrates a level of trust, but it also shares the responsibility and shares the burden, I think, of leadership at that early stage, because it's such an important time for startups to get their early traction. And I imagine early stage founders are really trying to just set everything perfectly as it needs to be set. And that level of fluidity might be perceived as a bit of wasting time. We're shuffling papers, but actually you're trying to get everything to fit where it's comfortable and where it works most optimally. So I guess, sharing the burden of it to know what they think of this whole thing as well.
Exactly. And you're contracting, and it's okay to recontract and go, okay, that didn't work, let's adjust it this way, and keep going that way, because that's part of your learning curve as an organisation, as a team, is, what works. But you've got to stay in dialogue, you've got to stay in conversation, and a bit like ground rules for a team, right? A team charter or whatever, you have an agreed way of tackling challenges or conflicts or disagreements, and you do it early. You don't wait until it's a real problem. You kind of surface it as early as you can, so you do have to make yourself available to people, because I've heard it. People are brought in, and they know what they're supposed to be doing in their job, but they haven't got the remit, and they can't align with their boss about what they should be focused on. They've been brought in as an expert, but they're not being leveraged in that way.
Yeah.
So knowing your people and but not over engineering it either at the early stages, right? It's sufficiently clear and functional. Might be just what you need in the early days. And then as you grow and mature, you need more clarity. There are more people involved. You just got more lines of communication that need to be clear.
I actually see that as one of the biggest mistakes, the desire for a structure that everyone can fit into, like, this is the org chart, this all makes sense, this is all symmetrical, this all looks nice, versus the sort of opposite of that, of just 10 people figuring it out every day and just coming in and going, what problem do we need to solve, and just trying to figure it out, being the other end of the scale. But actually being comfortable somewhere in the middle of that, being comfortable somewhere where, someone's role is a bit of this and a bit of that, and sometimes they do a bit of this other person's thing, but it works and it's going forwards, is far more favourable than a founder or CEO trying to control that in a structure. And it's actually, I think what I've observed, even in my own practice as well, is that in times of stress, you're trying to seek more control. You're definitely trying to wrap your arms around it a lot more. Whereas when it's working, you've got a nice margin, revenues are good, blah, blah, blah. I'm a lot more chill. I'm like, I don't really care who's doing what at this point. Like, it's clearly fine. And then as soon as it starts to, even if it's just cyclical, starts to dip, I'm like, right, who's doing what? Like, how do we need to structure this better? And da-da-da. And it's like, actually, that's not necessarily what this needs, and doesn't convey a whole load of trust, actually. And there's a lot of things that I have to check myself on in times of stress like that. But I think those are great tips. Following this person on now to their wonderful conclusion before the round they do before exit. So call it a Series B, 30 million. Company looks a lot different at this point. And she needs to lead a lot differently. Knows what sort of leader that she is broadly, but the organization's about to really change. What are the challenges, opportunities that you see of people at this stage that you coach, and what do you help them through at this particular point?
Well, look, by this stage, you've been through a lot, right? You've sacrificed a lot. You have probably lost some friends along the way. You are, you've been burnt out. Maybe you've pulled yourself from the brink. The team's been through a lot and so on. And now you're faced with a massive bunch of zeros that could change your life, right? Life-changing money. And that I've seen that change people significantly. So where there was passion and vision, now it's like, do you know, I gave it everything and I'm ready for my reward. And so that can mean that you take your eye off the ball. You've checked out mentally too soon. But also your leadership team needs a lot of guidance at this stage, and communication is so vital that because there's so much uncertainty, because with that kind of funding, potentially people get replaced at a senior level. Whoever comes in wants to bring in their own team, or partially have a complete change, have a partial or full change. And so there's a lot of anxiety that goes on among your leadership team when that happens, because they're wondering, what do I get to stay?
Yeah.
And also, if you've been the CEO, are you going to continue being the CEO? Because
That's a good question.
it's not uncommon that what got you here as a CEO, you don't have the skills for, or the interest or appetite for, to take it to the next level. And
you probably want to make that decision before your board makes it for you, by the way.
yes, but you know what? Your board probably has seen it or is making a decision way before you have actually realized it about yourself. So, because there'll be people who can see what kind of personality it takes to go to the next level. They've had enough experience of funding organizations and seeing how the founding CEO has stepped into that space or not. And so it's having also investing in yourself to say, do I want to stay and be the CEO? What's my focus? What's most important for me to do now at this juncture? And is there someone in my team who actually may be better in this role, that could take it on, that is excited by it still? So being honest with yourself about where you're at in this journey. And it's okay to say, I had a blast, but I want to go and do something else. But, don't step off too soon. Don't start dreaming. Don't spend your money before it's landed in your bank account, because that's going to steer you in the completely unhelpful direction. You'll take your foot off the pedal, and then that's when people start jostling for opportunity and roles and where they're going to go.
It's remarkable how similar this answer is to what you do right at the start. It's knowing yourself and knowing others. It's remarkable how similar that is. It's almost exactly the same. It's almost like that's the advice really all the way through, is keep knowing yourself and keep communicating with those around you, and the right answer will show itself at any particular time.
Right.
I can remember one of my friends raising a not too dissimilar amount to that in a not too dissimilar situation, who said to me that the problem was, what they loved was chatting to their co-founder in the back of a cab and just coming up with a new pricing model. They would send a message in Slack, and all of a sudden that would be the new pricing. Now, pricing has to go through the pricing team, and it's a load of ex-management consultants that are now at this startup in-house that do this massive model and come up with the answer that they would have come up with in 5 seconds, and it might have deviated by 10%. But ultimately, they would have just come up with it, and that would have been exciting and fascinating, all the rest of it. Whereas now there's all these levels of bureaucracy and red tape and all this sort of stuff. And they just said their job is now managing those people, and they hated it. They absolutely hated it. They stuck with it, and they did well. But it was not pleasant, I don't think, for that. Pleasant, obviously, because you're seeing your company grow and all the rest of it. But they really disliked. They described it as actually coming to the end of their arc. They described it as coming to the end of their story arc, and they really felt that tangibly. I know Umang from Microsoft has made a similar point about when Babylon got to that stage as well, just feeling like you're at the end of your story, because you look around and it's like, these aren't my people, this isn't my thing.
it's become the fun and the excitement isn't there anymore. The things that, the speed at which you can operate isn't there. There's the sort of immediacy. It's a bit like the difference between working at a desk and gardening, right? You're getting immediate haptic feedback when you're gardening, right? But at your desk, you're like, ones and zeros, and maybe there's an output, in a month or two, but it's not immediate. And I think it's the immediacy that we lose as the organisation grows. But it's just, that's the nature of the beast, right? You've got more people to coordinate. It's kind of amazing that projects happen and stuff gets built and created in the first place, right? If you think about it, taking all these different minds and coordinating everyone to kind of, wobble their way through and come out with something quite amazing. So, that in itself
wobbles
is
more than other times sometimes.
Right.
The wobble is very real. The wobble is very real.
For sure.
But I've learned so much here. I think, do you know what, honestly, the thing that I'm taking away from this is that the whole way through, you've got to know yourself and you've got to know others and you've got to communicate with others, and the right answer will show itself. I think that's the most important thing. And I think it's also making sure you equip yourself with the skills to know yourself as well. So, doing enough reading, knowing enough concepts, knowing what it is that you're looking for to know yourself, so you can put that into a frame, and the same of others too. I think that is what's important. And the communication bit as well. I think that two-way communication to build trust and to build a picture of what's going on in the organisation and all that sort of stuff is incredibly important. And man, the NHS would be doing so much better if we could all teach the people these skills. I honestly believe if we gave people the permission to not act like that when you're teaching, and just gave everyone the permission that that's okay. You don't have to lead like you were led. Like, that's okay. Then we can all be a bit more Dr. Disney. And I do encourage people to look at their content. He's awesome. I absolutely love the guy. Sehaam, this has been absolutely incredible. In terms of what you do and who you do it for, do you want to just give us a quick rundown, so that people listening, if they've resonated with what we've talked about, they might want to get in touch?
Yeah, thank you. So I teach leaders to use coaching skills in their conversations, because I truly believe that leaders who use just 10% of what I'm trained as a coach to do will yield some dividends, right, on many fronts. So that's my big passion, is teaching leaders to use those skills, what I call coach leadership. And I do that through my coaching, one-to-one. I do leadership team, senior leadership team coaching. I also have CPD programs, the main one being Leaders Who Coach, which is a 4-month program to learn and practice. There's a lot of live coaching practice, so we overcome the fear and awkwardness and discomfort of trying out new skills on people we're working with. And I have a YouTube channel and write about it and do stuff like this to just try and socialize the idea that it's not that hard. It can be as simple, really just time and holding space and asking a simple question that makes all the difference to somebody. Means you can go on holiday and have a nice time.
Tell me about it. And if people do want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me Sehaam, Sehaam. Coachlead.co is the website to go to, and you'll find me also Sehaam Cyrene on YouTube. So happy to be contacted any which way.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.